Hello everyone. Well, I'm back. I've finished my holiday and it's time to get on with things. And dungeon design is on the cards. You can see before you Wally DM's Journal of Puzzle Encounters. So if you're doing dungeons, you're probably going to use puzzles, or maybe you don't. And then it's also the Game Mastery's Book of Random Encounters. But that's not why you're here. The reason you're here is because I'm going to talk about torture chambers. And if you've looked on YouTube, you probably found not that much. And I think there's probably a good reason for that. So what I've done is I've done some research, and actually my home group were very helpful, since a few of them know quite a lot about torture areas and have actually been to some real locations. It was very, very helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to present to you as much information on torture chambers as I can without getting too gory or too, I guess, too scary. Like, I don't want to scare you off, okay? I'm aware that I could potentially do that. I'm going to put up a poll. Feel free to respond to that poll, and we're going to have a good time, even though it is torture chambers we're talking about, okay? So grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable. How's it going, Charles and Shina? How are you? Let's get cracking, okay? All right, let's rock into this little scene here. Get rid of this, and I should be just about ready to go. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about dungeon design, but I'm going to talk about a specific part of the dungeon, and that is going to be, as it happens, torture chambers. Oh dear, I've forgotten. Okay. Hi, welcome to How to RPG. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about dungeons and dungeon design, which is the torture chamber. And I have collected as much information as I possibly can. I'm going to go over that with you, and so that you've got something to work with. So the first thing I noticed with torture chambers is when you look on the internet, there's not that much information. And if you look on YouTube, it really doesn't give you what you're looking for if you're running a role-playing game. And so I want to try to correct that problem for you by doing this particular presentation today. So first off, torture chambers are made up of 3 different locations, and that is your prison, your torture area, and your execution area. Now, most torture chambers, or dungeons as they might be called, okay, if you think outside of Dungeons and Dragons in terms of a dungeon, I'm talking about a real dungeon that is used for that purpose, for a prison, torturing, and execution, say underneath the castle or somewhere else. They're very small. They occupy a very small space normally, but they could consist of separate chambers if the dungeon's very large. And there were large dungeons in medieval times, so you could have a large dungeon in your game. Prison cells can be anything from a deep hole with a cover over it. It could be a wooden cover, it could be an iron grate. You would also have wooden or iron cages to hold people. You might use a crow's cage, which was basically just a cage that would hold a person, and it would hang from a tree or a big stay, some sort of gallows section. They would hang it from all sorts of things. But if you had a large enough area, you could also suspend the crow's cage, this iron cage that would hold somebody, in a dungeon if the ceiling was quite high. So often you would have the high wooden scaffold that would hold the crow's cage, but for a dungeon area, it's only going to apply if the ceiling is quite high. And the reason you would do this is to keep them off the ground and make it harder for them to escape, but also to save space. Now, criminals were imprisoned inside the crow's cage without food or water until they died of dehydration and starvation, which is a horrible way to die. And certainly this is one way of torture, but also execution, just long form execution. Now this one is a bit of a tricky one to say. It's not the gibbet. It is the gibbet, isn't it? It's the gibbet. I think it's gibbet. Gibbet. It is an instrument for public execution normally, or a gallows, and it would hang a person in a wire frame molded around their body. It looked quite strange. It was not like the crow's cage. It was different. More often, the The gibbet is erected outside but could be used inside a dungeon, because they used to use normal forms of hanging from a noose with a rope inside a dungeon. So you could use a gibbet as well if you wanted to. The strapedo. Now, the strapedo was a simple rope or series of ropes and pulley system with the pulleys attached to the ceiling of the chamber, and the lifting ropes would be tied to the wrists of the victim, whose hands would then be tied behind their back. So it would be positioned in such a way as they would be behind your back and they would lift it up. And the strapedo would pull the shoulders out of their joints, causing extreme pain, and they would hang there for large periods of time. Possibly till they died, but also until they revealed the information that was being held by them. Now, you'll notice that a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is the kinds of torture equipment that you would find inside a torture chamber. And I thought that would be really useful to you. There's quite a few items. I'm not going to go over absolutely everything, but I'll do my best. The Iron Maiden was an iron coffin featuring a sort of mallard face on it, and you would put a poor victim inside. Okay, they would be thrown inside, and then it would have folding hinges in the front, and it would fold onto them. They would often have iron spikes positioned inside the coffin that would point inward, that would pierce their skin, causing them to bleed slowly. And of course, they would have blood loss occurring, and of course, eventually they would die if they would stay in there without some sort of medical treatment. But the Iron Maiden did not always have spikes on the inside. Sometimes it was just spikeless. There was a design that required no spikes on the inside. It was still called the Iron Maiden, and the reason for using it is people get claustrophobic. It's very uncomfortable being locked in a position where you're standing and you can't breathe very well. So it's still another form of torture, and you could be left there for a long time. They could also heat the Iron Maiden, which is quite a horrible prospect as well. The wooden horse, or charvalet, I think it's also called the Spanish donkey. It has another name which I cannot pronounce. This torture device had two variations that existed. Both inflicted pain by using the subject's own weight by keeping their legs open, so they would spread their legs open, and they would be tied with ropes from above while they were lowered down onto this horse. And the horse shape, the wooden horse shape, it could be made out of metal, but often it was a wooden horse. It was shaped like a sharp triangular box, and this meant that it would apply the point of that triangle would apply pressure to their buttocks and to their genitals, which is extremely unpleasant. So that's another type of torture device you would find inside the torture chamber. You have the guillotine. Now, the guillotine was usually used for outdoor displays, an instrument for inflicting capital punishment by decapitation, which is removing the head. So a guillotine used a sharp, wide, heavy blade, and it would be dropped from the top of a frame vertically in grooves onto somebody's head, who would be placed inside the frame. This is not so much torture, this is execution. The rack torture device is gruesome, and basically the idea was the individual's joints would be dislocated or torn from their sockets. They would actually be maimed, okay? You would lose limbs. And this would cause, in some cases, paralyzation for the rest of their life if they survived the process and didn't wind up getting executed anyway. And so basically your torture rack is a table. It didn't necessarily have to be a complete normal table. It might have just ribs to it, and it would have a system of cranks attached to ropes, and those ropes would be tied to the victim's limbs, and they would be stretched. It's actually very effective, and unfortunately, they didn't have to apply very much pressure to do a lot of damage. Next, you have the iron chair. The victim, and this is basically an iron chair, and the victim would be seated in several straps or plates made out of brass, and then placed over an open flame. They would actually roast them while they were sitting in this iron chair. And yes, being slowly roasted alive doesn't sound very pleasant. There were a few variations of the iron chair that included small spikes that would go up into the buttocks. And yeah, you don't want to be dealing with that one. The pillory, basically, this device is basically either made out of wood or metal. It's a framework erected on a post, and it was usually employed for displays in public. It had holes in it. It would secure your head and your hands, and it was a form of punishment primarily for humiliating people in public, but it could also be used to secure somebody in a torture chamber or in a prison, rather than using manacles or ropes. But of course, the good thing about the pillory is that you could further abuse somebody because they could not get away, they could not avoid stuff, they couldn't move their head, their hands, their body. They were secured pretty well. Another one, and you may not have heard of this before, and that is the cat's paw was a three-pronged device. It kind of looks like a claw. Think Wolverine's claws, but kind of bent over. And it would be used to shred human flesh and cause all sorts of gouging and marks and lines. So it's not a very nice tool, but it was certainly out there. Prisoners would be forced to wear a head cage. The head cage, sometimes you might think of the Man in the Iron Mask, but often the head cage would be literally a cage. You could see through it, you could see the person's head back and front. It had lots of gaps in it, but it was basically a cage. Now, the reason for doing that was it would lock the head in place so the jailers could torture them in a variety of different ways. It just made it easier to control where their head would go. Thumb screws. Thumb screws is a torture instrument, been around a long time, first employed by modern Europe, and they're basically designed to crush the thumbs and the forefinger. Not a particularly nice way to go. If you've ever dislocated your thumb or your fingers before, you'll know how painful it is. The tiger's chair. This is a steel chair that had affixed iron legs and handcuffs that restrained the body, often in painful positions. So it wouldn't just seat you normally, you would be positioned in such a way that you did not want to be in that position, and you would be held there, fixed by these handcuffs indefinitely for however long they decided to leave you there. Then we have our manacles and our ropes that were used to secure your prisoners to the walls, to their equipment, or to a cage, or just for transport. The iron bull is not that common. You didn't necessarily see an iron bull being dragged by somebody with manacles or chains around them, but we see a lot of that stuff in movies, don't we? Next, we have a rather horrible piece of equipment, and that is the bronze or brazen bull. And basically, it was a hollowed out metal bull, quite often made out of bronze, and they would open up the bronze bull, put the victim inside because there was a cavity inside it. They would lock it, they would lock them inside, and then they would put them over an open flame and heat the bull until basically they cooked. And so you could use that for torture, but also for execution potentially. I'm sure a few people died accidentally. The next one is quite strange, and this is the breaking wheel, or just called the wheel. And this is basically exactly what it sounds like, because it had spokes on it, and it would be dropped onto your limbs to break bones. And essentially, it's the wheel slightly modified that would come off a wagon. So the old wagon wheel, the wooden wagon wheel with the metal straps and stuff like that, they would just simply take one of those, modify it, and then use it for just dropping on somebody. Because it was so heavy, it would do a lot of damage. The branding hot irons also, lots of irons and tongs were used in terms of torture. And then the one thing that you probably want to consider too, which is kind of weird, is that even in the medieval times, the torture chamber was designed acoustically to muffle the sound of screaming and noise, because a lot of noise would come from a torture area, and you didn't want to put off everybody from eating their dinner, even though you would probably lower in the castle location, or your dungeon was set off from everywhere else. You wanted to sort of muffle those sounds so that people didn't have to hear all those horrible noises as people went to their business and or was executed. Like, all of this is quite horrible when you think about what people will do. But I'm not suggesting that you include torture into your role-playing games. But I am aware that when you put your dungeons together, there is a temptation quite often to put in a torture area or a prison area or an execution area. So now these are the devices that you can include in those locations to make it a bit more authentic, and hopefully scare people a little bit, but hopefully not too much. I want to thank my patrons who support me so I can keep doing this program. I want to thank you for watching, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Give me a second. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry I restarted because I had forgot to press the record button. I'm also sorry that this took me so long because I wrote a lot of notes, like a lot of stuff I wrote down before this, but also after. I can't imagine. There's probably a good reason why you don't find this topic on YouTube. I would imagine that YouTube is going to hide this video from people pretty efficiently because it is such a gory subject. Okay, I did not provide you with pictures, and I'm probably never going to. Just talking about it is enough. Okay, so let's have a look and see who's here. Hello. So by the way, Charles Butler is a patron. Thank you for being here. Shiner81, hello. How are you? Fred Hubber, hello. How are you? Good morning. Michael Stan, hello Michael. Michael's also a patron. How are you doing? Dungeons and Chronics, hello. Nice to have you here. Dice Goblin J, hello. I went to the Museum of Medieval Torture in Florida. I can imagine the sorts of things you would have seen. Like we had a discussion with my home group last night about torture chambers, and a few of them have seen the real deal, and they're not nice spaces, but they're also quite small, so they're not like what you see in the movie. The movies sort of depict them slightly differently to what they really were, and you wouldn't necessarily have the torture chamber with multiple chambers. Sometimes it was just one big room. I know somebody was mentioning to me that you wouldn't have a guard area. No, you would not put the guards in a separate room because you wanted the guards to be in the location where the prisoners were to ensure they did their job, which is keep an eye on them. So otherwise they would go off and play cards and roll dice and probably not pay attention to all the screaming and yelling. Okay, since it's soundproof, they didn't need to worry about it. So you would actually have your guards in that location. When they went off duty, then they would leave that area completely. I think that's pretty much what I had here. Okay, so we're going to do a lot more dungeon design stuff today. So we're not just doing the torture chamber. I thought I would present the torture chamber to you because it was kind of it was something that people had asked about in the past, so I thought it was a good idea to go with it to begin with. Numbing of the sound's good. Yeah. Apparently a torch is how a, what is it? I don't understand what you've said there, Dice Goblin. The sentence doesn't make any sense. Is how a Pegasus is turned into a nightmare. Oh, yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Torture is how a Pegasus is turned into a nightmare. Yes. Yeah, if you look at some of the lore around the creation of the nightmare, that's only in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't think that's not mythological lore. That's just D&D lore. So I hopefully it wasn't too gory for you. What do you got here, Fred? Legend is the inventor of the bronze bull was put inside and cooked alive by the monarch he designed it for. I would not be surprised. Yeah, so what Dice Goblin is saying is when the actual torture chamber that he came across, or dungeon, not your D&D dungeon, but a real dungeon, they are quite small. There isn't a lot of space, so you don't usually allocate a lot of space to those locations. And there's a reason why they had things like hanging and the crow's cage. So you could secure a prisoner outside in the weather and it would take up a lot less space. You know, you would just hang one of these cages from something, you know, like some sort of wooden arm and stand. What did I get? Wasn't part of the legend that the monarch was satisfied with it, but only after the inventor was no longer among the living. Yes. Yeah, well, that sounds really horrible. Anyway, what I thought I would do is I've done a few videos on dungeon design before, and I was going to go over dead-end passageways, and then I'm probably going to talk about dungeon levels. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the document. All of this stuff will eventually go to Patreon, but I suspect it will take me some time to get all that stuff compiled. So if you're wanting a document from it much earlier and don't want to have to wait until I finally complete the entire thing, if you're a patron, the best thing is to simply contact me and let me know so that I can put it up there, okay? If there's just a certain section that you want, then I can just do that. But it's going to take me many, many weeks to actually complete it. Anyway, Let me just grab my phone so I can track what's going on, and I will just have a little discussion with you about dungeons and their dead ends. Because I think a lot of people assume that the concept of the dead end is something that should be removed from their games. But there's a reason for having dead ends. So I thought I would actually talk about that. Because a lot of people, and this is, I think, product of inexperience, talking about a subject when you actually don't know very much about the subject in the first place, which happens on YouTube all the time. There are topics that I've talked about that I don't really know that much about, and so I'm always worried that I will go off on some horrible tangent that actually doesn't relate to it. But let's look at dead end passageways and why they would exist in your dungeon in the first place. So to do this, and to make it a little bit easier for myself, I'm going to switch my screen over and Windows. And I should be able to pull this up now. Okay, that's that. And now I just need to switch over to the actual scene that I want. Okay, so dead end passageways. So this is material that I created a while back. It's been a long time since I've actually gone through this. So what I'll do is I'll explain each bit and sort of highlight the things that are important. I'm probably going to add in a few notes along the way. We'll see how that goes. What do we got here? You guys are talking about stuff that I've missed it, have I? You know, who loves torture? Love a tour, okay. If you're not a patron, I'd highly recommend becoming one. Yeah, look, you can pay as little as $1 a month and you get everything. Like, seriously, you get everything. And I'm not full-time, so I don't have artwork. I don't pay for artists. But you get a lot of the stuff in a document form that you can easily port or copy into your own notes. I am all for you cannibalizing and reusing stuff in a particular way. And then a lot of the things that I run exist in PDF form or in an open document source, which is easy for you to access, so you do not need to have Adobe or anything like that. So, yes. Fred, feeding prisoners is expensive and dangerous, so long-term imprisonment was rare. They used punishment that was quick and avoided needing to feed the prisoners. Yes, so I wasn't going to mention that so much, Fred, but you do make a good point. Yes, incarceration and torture were not things they wanted to use for a long period of time because it did require feeding, unless of course they put you into a crow's cage and hung you out to starve and to dehydrate, because they wouldn't feed you. They just needed to clean or clear the cage once you had perished and take your body away, unless of course they wanted to leave you up as a reminder to somebody. Anyway, let's go over dead ends and why they exist. So why do dungeons have dead end passageways? Because you might have noticed, if you look particularly at older dungeons, they have a lot of them. Modern dungeons have a lot less of them. And this is actually probably the reason for it is, one, people don't understand why there are dead ends in a dungeon. And I'm talking about not your normal standard real dungeon, but your classical Dungeons and Dragons or fantasy dungeon, which is kind of like a maze, right? So is the dead end a design flaw that's carried over from older versions of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing games? Is it just because the designers back then were not very good at designing, and that's why they put so many dead ends in their dungeons? That is I think people have assumed way too much, because they were deliberately placed there into a dungeon for a specific purpose, and they had many different purposes. So when somebody says to you, oh, the reason that dead ends exist in a dungeon is it's a design flaw. The designers back then aren't as good as the designers now. That is a very arrogant and short-sighted view of the whole design of dungeons, because dungeons fulfilled a very different purpose to what we understand now. The idea of the dead end is that you had to figure out why the dead end was there. It was placed there for the players to figure out why was there a dead end. And there were a lot of different reasons why there were dead ends in a dungeon. Dead ends are intended to confuse an explorer or the adventurer, and they take inspiration from maze design. This is where, Dave Arneson specifically, but also Gary Gygax, had taken a lot of their dungeon designers from the actual maze. And the reason for it is they wanted to confuse the players' characters, but particularly the players, confuse the players, get the explorers lost in the dungeon is another way by having lots of dead ends. And you can achieve that with a dead end by, it does get people lost a little bit. But also it forces them to give up. And I'm going to come back to this whole point in a second. It does force them to give up on the process of exploring that location, so that now they won't find the things they shouldn't be finding. These are the hidden locations, because dungeons often have a hidden location, which we'll talk about some other time. Environmental erosion. So a dead end might occur as a result of environmental erosion, earthquakes, causing the passageway to collapse, creating a dead end that was not intended to be a dead end. And you can usually tell these because you will see collapsed rubble. The passageway over time, structurally, maybe it wasn't sound enough, or it's losing its strength and it becomes unstable and it collapses an area. So there's another reason why you might have a dead end, is a collapsed passageway. And of course, there would be potentially more of the passageway beyond the rubble, as long as you can safely clear that passageway and that blockage from all the rubble that is in the way. Bricking over a passageway can be done deliberately to stop anyone going into a dangerous area. So maybe an area became too dangerous for the people who designed their dungeon, and so the best way was to simply brick over the passageway so it looked like there was no way to proceed, or it's been bricked over deliberately because there's a restricted location, and instead of having a main access point that's nice and obvious, they've removed it by blocking and bricking it up, and instead there's a secret door, maybe not there, but somewhere else. And they've got a new entry point into that restricted area. Or that restricted area was blocked off permanently and it was never going to be used after that. A dead-end passageway might mean that the dungeon is incomplete. It's not uncommon for a dungeon potentially to be midway or not have the construction finalized. So they haven't actually finished it yet. And the passageway will be finished at a later date in the future. So what you're coming across is just somebody incorporating the concept that your dungeon is a living, breathing thing, and that it actually functions under the same kind of restrictions that more normal construction has, which is it takes a long time to build something, particularly if it's underground, and to do it safely. You can have a magical illusion, might hide a passageway from intruders by presenting a dead end so that they turn back. Now, it's probably not the best way to do a dead end as a magical illusion, but if you've got a lot of people who are just walking around and you don't want to brick it up, and a magical illusion might do part of that, I think what you're more likely to wind up finding is you would use a magical illusion to present a dead-end passageway. When somebody goes to explore the dead-end passageway that is only hidden by an illusion, you would have a trap in conjunction with your magical illusion that would be triggered, set off, and cause all sorts of strife for somebody. A hidden area is basically the reason for having a dead end is to include a hidden area, and this indicates to explorers. Like if you have been experienced enough playing role-playing games and Dungeons and Dragons, you know almost immediately that if you see a dead end, there may well be a secret door that needs to be found to be able to progress and follow that route. So you just need to look for the secret door. Now, it might not necessarily be on the same wall where the dead end is. It may be along the walls of the passageway somewhere. It may even be in a completely different room that isn't part of this area. But occasionally there might be a secret door that's placed right there. So it's also to indicate there are secret areas. Dead ends indicate to players, hopefully if they're experienced enough, there are secret areas to be found. One of the things you'll also notice is, depending on the way that you've used your dead end, players often don't think to smash down a wall. How many times have players brought along tools and equipment, capable of breaking down a brick wall or a stone wall that they come across that's been bricked up. Yeah, if they can't find a secret door and it's actually just been bricked up and they want to continue on that route, they would actually have to have some equipment capable of breaking through. And their fighting equipment that they use is probably inadequate for doing that. And then what about, often you'll find that players will consider clearing rubble from a passageway to get to a hidden area or an area that is blocked off. But if it takes too long, they might give up. So, but I think you'll find most of the time players, when they come to a dead end and it's not just fallen rubble, they probably won't proceed. So I just wanted to mention those concepts in terms of how do dead ends work in your dungeons? How do you incorporate them, and why do you have them in the first place? I'm going to go back to the chat just for a second because I'm actually going to work through some other stuff, but I was actually struggling to find exactly what I wanted when I wanted it. So I'm going to drink some water. So Pale Rider. So for those of you who are wondering what's going on, so the settings on my microphone have not changed, and I have set myself at about, the settings for my computer are about 70 in terms of the volume, okay, and then I usually set my volume on YouTube at half. But somewhere along the line, there's been an update to Windows or to YouTube. I suspect it's YouTube or to OBS. And it's actually outside of my control. Right now, when I look at OBS, I'm in the band, which sort of indicates that I cannot go any higher than I am. And yet I have not changed the settings on my microphone. So that means that an update of some kind has interfered with that whole process. It's a little bit frustrating because I know that if I try to compensate for it, when a new update comes through, it will throw everything out again. And I would actually probably make the sound even worse. So for those of you who are likely to watch the edited versions, I will fix that in post, but I can't fix it on the YouTube end for the live streams. Because what will probably happen, and I suspect it's YouTube, because YouTube's been doing all sorts of stupid things recently that are really frustrating me. It's probably when YouTube gets their act together and fixes it, the sound will probably settle down. But I don't know when that's going to happen. I don't believe it is OBS updates that have caused the problem. I don't believe that it is any of my software drivers. I think what it is YouTube. YouTube does this from time to time, and it's really, really annoying. And I could wind up overcompensating, and then, of course, when they do fix it, it'll wind up being way too loud. I have set the microphone pretty close to me, and I've also set it to cardioid, which is basically you only pick up the sound directly in front of the microphone, whereas the other one, when I was doing the painting, was set for stereo, so you get the sound from all around. But I did notice that just the other day. Really frustrating, and I just don't think that I should fix it. If I try to fix it, it'll probably cause problems. So I'm really sorry about that. If I'm too low, you'll just have to crank me up a little bit more. But thank you for pointing that out, Pale Rider. I was actually aware. Yeah. Okay. So what have you got here? I think I miss something here. I think I did miss, somebody had mentioned something in the chat here. Digging and found a vein of ore. Passage follows the ore till it runs out. No more reason to keep going. Yes, that's true. So a dead-end passageway in a mine might indicate that the ore just simply stopped, and there was no point actually continuing cutting into the rock to actually get at the ore, because there's no more ore to actually mine. So that makes a lot of sense, Fred Hubber. Absolutely. We used to describe the map, not hand a map to the players. Yes, I am aware, I remember. We still kind of do that in my group, but not always. It depends on how complicated it is. Sometimes it's just a pain. Dungeons in D&D are also created to trap monsters for wizards, ingredients, and experiments. Yes, they can. So let me just do something here. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to get all of this, but I'll do my best. What was it? I think. Yeah, so I'll just pull this down here. So Fred, your point about the ore, particularly from mine, very pertinent. A mine passageway follows the ore till it runs out. Okay. Yep. Yep. Very good. Right, now we're going back through the chat here. I thought it was just me on your lap. No, Charles, it's not. It's happened in the last. I think it's happened in the last 3 or 4 days. I noticed the drop off, and it was really frustrating. And this has happened to me multiple times with when I'm using my phone or I'm doing a live stream, and I suspect it is YouTube yet again. They just do crazy stuff. What do you got here? Cartography skill will need to be to get a better description from the DM. Dwarf cartographer was highly desired as it could sense direction and slopes. Are you talking about older versions of D&D? Okay, yep. Yeah. I would not be surprised if you're on your Pale Rider, if you're on your phone, you'll probably find that the sound is worse compared to if you were on your laptop or your desktop. Again, like I said, there's something that is it's an update at some end and it's causing problems. Right now, I'm actually sitting pretty much in the sweet spot in terms of sound on OBS. Unless I yell like you probably it's it's actually sitting in the sweet spot, and I can't actually crank it up anymore unless I go to my microphone. And I apologize, but yeah, that's outside of my control. Somebody else is controlling that aspect of it right now. All right, so what do you got here? Dice Goblin. I like to put a little something at every dead end. Yes, that can make it a bit. Dead ends can be a bit more interesting by doing something like that. Gelatinous cube, traps, fun stuff at the dead ends. Yeah, they can certainly be incorporated in some way. Absolutely, I agree. So, a magical illusion. A dead end. And might hide a trap. I'm just going to make sure that I put that in. Okay, I'd almost forgot to include that. But anyway, I got it there. All right, so what else we got here? I like to put a little something in there. Yes, gelatinous cube using an item or an environmental hazard. Yes. Yep. Environmental hazards, certainly. Dead ends makes sense, particularly if it's a collapsed passageway. Yeah, you got to love technology. Yeah, so I go to all this trouble to make sure that my sound is set up and working properly and everything's working at my end, that I'm streaming at 4K if you want to watch it in 4K on your TV, and it's software at somebody else's end that causes the problem. It's just, it's annoying. Now, the reason I had written off OBS and Windows as not being the cause of the problem is because in the last 3 or 4 days when this occurred, there were no updates for OBS and there were no updates for Windows. So it must be YouTube that's causing the problem right now. Otherwise, I would have not been able to cancel those out. An update potentially occurring with OBS or from Windows would mess things up, or one of my drivers, but none of that's actually happened recently. So it's got to be YouTube, unfortunately. Hello, Julius. How are you? How are you doing? Now, dumb question. No, let's have a look at your question. Okay. Okay, so Charles, I'm just reading your question so I get it in my head first. So your question is, would a long passageway with a dead end be a shibboleth for the guards to know if someone actually belongs down there? It's a good question. I'm not too sure. You got me on speaker? Okay, Dungeons and Chronics. Obviously, those of you who've got your phones, stick me on speaker. Is there a difference between speaker on the phone or not? I don't think there is. Anyway. Oh dear. Also, too, I wound up having some strange things occur to me because I was re-listening to some of my live streams that were really quiet on my desktop on my phone, and some of them were in the last couple of days, like the last painting live stream I did, was actually perfectly fine and easy to listen to off my phone. And I was like, okay, this is really inconsistent. It's got to be YouTube. Yes, a long dead end could alert a guard that someone is unfamiliar with the place and thus suspect for going the wrong way. Yeah. I mean, it's only going to work if you find that there are guards positioned in the dead end passageway. If you put a guard at the dead end passageway and somebody walks down there, then they probably don't know where they're going. They probably don't belong there. So you would have to position a guard at the end of the dead end for that to really work that way. Otherwise, they wouldn't know. Unless, of course, you position the guards close to where the passageway is that is going to lead to a dead end. Only cleaners go there, and you don't have a mop exactly. Okay, so we've been talking about passageway dead ends for a little while, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to talk about dungeon levels. But before I do that, I'm going to give you a link to a video that I did a little while ago. How long? About a year ago, I think it was, that talks about dungeon levels. And I was hoping that I would be able to find my notes so I could just simply cut and paste this, but I was not able to do so. So instead, I'm going to give you the video as a link, and I'm going to work and take the information from that and port it over into my notes, which I'll be working on in a second. So I'm going to have to plug myself in so I can hear it. So hopefully that doesn't come through. I certainly hope not. If it does, you'll have to let me know in the chat. And because I can't actually remember what I said about dungeon levels, because dungeon levels are really important. If it wasn't obvious, dungeon levels are really important, right? But I don't honestly remember what I said. Like, there's been too much going on. I think that's half the problem. Okay, so secret areas, dungeon locations, dungeon environment, dungeon levels. There we go. That's what I was hoping to get my hands on, is dungeon levels. Let's see. Let's take that off. Okay. All right. Let's turn the sound off on this one. You see the link? Okay, this is the link. So this is the link I'm taking everything from, and I'm actually going to watch it and then transplant some of this information. If there's anything there you see that I don't cover, let me know so that I can add it in. My intention is this document be something that can be used. I had hoped to actually port this over before this. So let me just grab that document and let's port this back over. This is where we're at now. Dungeon levels. Here we go. Dungeon levels. And so all of the stuff in yellow is actually unrelated to dungeon levels, people. It's got nothing to do with it whatsoever. And this is the video. Oh my gosh, I'm outside. You won't be able to hear the sound coming through. I don't think I can capture the sound off this. Um, so you're all aware that dungeon levels have descending. You know, they go from the surface and they go deeper. And what's really, really strange about dungeon levels is all of the levels at the top are usually the easiest levels. And the harder levels, the levels that are most dangerous, are actually lower down. And of course, if you think in terms of reality, it does not make sense that dungeon levels work that way. You would think that dungeon levels would have the more difficult, dangerous locations at the top to keep everybody out. But they don't design them that way. And the reason is that dungeon levels are used like a game mechanic. And that is, we don't want to put new players, characters, at low level in a lot of danger straight away, because they just get killed. So what you wind up doing is the dungeon level is actually an indication of character level. See what I mean? So the top levels are for the lower level characters, and the bottom levels of a dungeon, the deeper ones, are for the higher level characters. And although it doesn't make any logical sense in terms of designing it that way, it's logically designed that way to accommodate character levels so that you don't wind up dying. Because you can't enter a dungeon at the lowest level where it's easy, because again it would just break the concept. So that's why it's designed that way. So dungeon levels have descending regions from the surface that are designed to accommodate the character level that players are working with. So so this means, okay, the easiest levels are closer to the surface, so they can be accessed by lower level characters. The hardest levels are deeper, so that only higher level characters will be able to reach them. So that's the kind of concept. Okay, this goes against the, I guess, the real world design of a subterranean dungeon or area, because you would want the best security near the surface. stop intruders. So, if you're wondering what's the deal with dungeon levels, I'm sure more than a few of you are already very much aware of this. I have no doubt that you're very much aware of this. There's a couple of other reasons why dungeons are sort of designed this way in terms of, you know, dungeon level, and I mean we come across it in video games, we come across it in old school D&D, older versions of D&D, but even modern versions, when they use a dungeon, they still apply the same process. Okay, so I just want to let you know that this is what's going on. I'm not going to show you those screens again. I did provide that link. Just going to go back to chat. Lovely intro on the video. Oh, thank you, Charles. I appreciate it. It's probably a little bit hard to hear because there's so many cicadas going bananas. There are levels, as in floors of a building, and levels of difficulty. Yes, this is very much what I was saying. Yeah, Abomination Vault, Sand, Pathfinder. I haven't played that, but pretty good dungeon crawl. Okay, I'm not really aware of Abomination Vault. I've never heard of it. I do have a lot of Pathfinder adventures on my shelves, by the way. Dwarves delving too deep. Release the Bell-rock. Yeah. So the Bell-rock was deep below the ground. So that's another concept behind what's going on there. So let me just see what else. What is this guy saying? Okay. All right. So something to actually. So character levels are reflected in the dungeons progressing deeper levels. Yep. Okay. I put that down, and you're gonna have to bear with me while I do this, people. Okay. Okay, so this is another thing that I probably should put in. Sorry, people, I just need to make sure I've got enough water in me and the lozenges are coming in. You often put your best treasure in the lower levels, because the idea is that if you do that and your best treasures are to be found deeper down, then you can force your players to get their characters to go deeper down into the dungeon and explore more. And that's what you want. That's part of the game, right? So the best rewards and treasures are found in the lowest and the deepest, I say the deepest levels of the dungeon, to encourage players' characters to explore the region more. So, and look, most of this is probably really completely obvious to a lot of you. Like, I would imagine that more than a few of you aren't unfamiliar with these facts. But I'm just going to make a list of these different aspects, because I don't often see people write this stuff down. And if you go online, you don't often find it floating around anywhere. I'm just going to update my phone. My phone doesn't seem to be catching up with the live chat for some reason. Okay, good. Yes, that's right. That's very true, Fred. Is that people don't have levels. They have levels of skill, but they don't have levels. So absolutely very true. Okay, so here's another thing that I haven't mentioned, and that is, and you're aware, if you've played enough games, you know that taking anything that leads you deeper down is not always a good idea. Whether it's an elevator, whether it's stairs, it's not necessarily the best thing to do, because if you do so, you're usually going to be entering a more difficult region in the dungeon. This is why people usually try to clear out one level of a dungeon first, explore everything, get all the resources in that location before going down. So, if you've played anything that has descending dungeons, then you'll be familiar with this. So, stairs and elevators. Elevators lead to harder areas in a dungeon. So it's often smarter to explore the existing dungeon level completely before going down. Okay. Elevators, come on. Okay, cool. Leads to harder areas. Okay, cool. I've got that done. What do you got here, Michael? Yeah, you should look up abomination bulbs. I think it's like 10 levels of dungeon with kind of a boss at the end of each one. It's pretty cool. So I guess a good example of dungeon delving is Under Mountain. Probably one of the most famous dungeons there ever been put out is Under Mountain. There are some mega dungeons out there as well, but I think most of you are familiar with Under Mountain, which is now a Wizards of the Coast property, and found in the Forgotten Realms. And they've got a book that they put out, which I'm not going to talk too much about, but yes, that's got 23 different levels, and I've been presenting, whether you realize it or not, this book here, which I'm not too worried about the fact that it's made by Wizards of the Coast, because it's not in print anymore. Okay, so they're really not going to be making money off this thing. But this is the Halls of Under Mountain. It's for 4th edition. And I've been using this and presenting it in my polls on my YouTube channel, and then asking various questions and getting you to respond to it. Now, I don't necessarily respond with all the answers you might want because time. I just don't have the time. But that's what I've been doing, is I've actually been pulling. There's a reason why there's a bookmark here. The bookmark indicates how far through the Halls of Under Mountain you've been playing through, if you've been playing on those those polls that I put up for this. So I've been using that, and I'm probably going to keep doing that, although it's not that popular. I find out of all the polls that doesn't really draw the most attention, but I keep doing it because it's kind of fun. Do you know what I mean? It takes me back to fighting fantasy. If I could find the fighting fantasy books and I could present that, I would. That's the reason why I'd put forward on one of the community posts just recently, or a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I found an app for fighting fantasy, and one of the books is free. The rest you have to pay for, and basically allows you to play through some of the better, pick your own path, single player, solo play RPGs, which is in the form of a book. Hi Jeeves, how's it going? My audio is really low. Honestly, the only thing I can do is get really, really close to the microphone. That's about the best I can do, because if I try to do anything else, it's just not going to work. So I think what I will do for today, as we've kind of gone over a few things, maybe today I just sit here instead of going over, because normally today I would build out more of the dungeon material that you would need. Yep, I would share that, but it's probably not going to work very well. I can move my microphone about as close as that. That's probably about as good as it gets without it getting in the way of everything. Okay, so what do we got here? The Undermountain looks cool. I will look at it and look into it. Well, you can. You don't have to. I think you'll find that it has some good stuff there. It's not necessarily going to be your thing. It's very common in dungeon design to include puzzles. I've noticed. So a few of you may have noticed that I have been talking about 5e compatible supplements that fans have made. And if you look at dungeon design and you look up YouTube, you'll find a vast number of people who have made videos talking about Legend of Zelda dungeon design, which is very much like a puzzle dungeon. And not all dungeons are built like a puzzle dungeon. This is not because... So when we talk about Legend of Zelda puzzle dungeons, it's not because Legend of Zelda does it better than role-playing games. What Legend of Zelda is doing is the people who make Legend of Zelda are pulling from old D&D, all the things they learned when they were playing the game, and incorporating it into a video game. And a lot of them are revolving around solving puzzles. And those puzzles are, they're not your standard puzzles. They are interactive puzzles where you have to move from one location to the other, where you have to grab keys, stuff like that. So the reality is that when you see somebody start talking about, and I think recently somebody's made a video on Zelda dungeon design, because there's a new video game, isn't there? A new video game for Zelda. So Legend of Zelda pulls from old D&D. It's not the other way around. So you shouldn't be pulling from Zelda concepts for your dungeon design, because that would be like going back to watching the third installment of the Terminator movies. You know what I mean? It's already been done before. I think they use it more as a ploy to get you to watch stuff. Now, I did find 3 supplements for the Legend of Zelda, and at the end of the week on my Friday, which is your Thursday in North America, I'll be talking about and showing off the Legend of Zelda 5e fan-made PDFs that I've found, and showing them to you and talking about them. And I can assure you now, none of those have puzzle elements tied to them. Okay? None of that is actually tied and connected in any way. Because building and making puzzles is actually really difficult, and to build a puzzle that's set up like a Zelda game, or a dungeon that is a puzzle, like navigating through a maze, is actually not that easy. What do you got here? Dice Goblin. I've been increasingly curious about the old D&D material. I even managed to find a free Dark Sun PDF. There's actually, you can get access to all of the Dark Sun PDFs. I believe that they have them all available either on, I think it's DM's Guild or Drive Through RPG. I think it's DM's Guild. I would suggest go grabbing that stuff while you can, people, if you want it, because I don't think the DM's Guild is going to last long. I think it'll wind up going the way of the dodo. I think it's very, very unlikely it'll stay around. So let's just have a look at this poll here. I'm going to end it. I've given you guys a lot of information. I think maybe what I will do is, just because the sound is so bad today and so low for some people, not a very not a good experience, unfortunately, for people. Probably better for me to finish up early, and we come back. Now, what am I doing tomorrow? Tomorrow we're going to do a skill challenge. Now, as you know, I run the skill challenge Game Master preparation once every 2 months. Every 2 months we roll round, we make another skill challenge. It's not the 4E skill challenge. I've taken that concept and poured it over all of the advancements for that, and that's going to be tomorrow. I am probably going to do river rapids rather than the minecart. I know I see the poll is heading towards that, but I see nobody in the comments section talking about why they want to have the minecart as a skill challenge. Yet I do see people commenting who do come to my channel who are talking about the fact that they would much prefer to have the tidal wave or the river rapids. So we'll be doing that. So this week's going to be interesting. So we've got skill challenge tomorrow. We'll build one of those. After that, we've got monster building and monster lore, and we're going to finish off a few monster tools that we've been building. After that, we're going to build the Thief for Shadow Dark, the Shadow Dark RPG system by Kelsey, or Arcane Library. And then we have more Star Wars Saga, but this time we'll be dealing with basic combat. And then the end of the week, as I said, it'll be the 5e compatible Legend of Zelda stuff. So yeah, a few things to look forward to. Hopefully you'll find something that you like the look of and want to join in on. And I'm gonna disappear and get on with some stuff, since I think I've pretty much come to the end of my my voice, actually, to a certain degree. So hey, huge thank you to my patrons who support me on Patreon. As I said, everything that I do goes up onto Patreon. Eventually, if there's something that I haven't put up, you simply ask for it and I will work on it a bit faster if I haven't completed it. I want to thank everybody who's been in the chat today. I do appreciate you being here. Thank you to everybody who was taking part in the poll and answering that question. Okay, it seemed clear to me that have you used a torture chamber in your role-playing games? No, most people don't use torture chambers in their role-playing games, probably because they've been put off by a variety of different things. If you're just watching, thank you very much. If you're re-watching, thank you too. Thank you for being here, Shiner 81, Pale Rider, Michael, thank you for being here, Dice Goblin, Charles Butler, it's great to have you, F Hubber, and if I've missed anybody, I was at Dungeons and Chronics, of course, is here, and we've got Julius. So thank you so much for all of you who've been in the chat and commenting and helping the sort of build the conversation. It's been appreciated. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the wee early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.